Hello ladies and gentlemen, once again this is Jeremy Smith, Photog J the Great. I've come back with you once again to show you yet another camera. Today we're going to be taking a look at Nikon's new D7100. In keeping with Nikon's latest releases, this camera was not announced that long ago, and here it is. It finds itself in my hands relatively quickly. Hopefully there's no dust issues or anything crazy like on the D600. And of course, I'll be testing this even further. The new format seems to be working out pretty well. Everyone seems to like looking at me talk about the camera a little bit and then looking at samples later and looking at the camera in specific shooting situations later on. So I think I'm going to keep that up for the time being at least. But anyways, let's go ahead and kind of take a look at this. It's very similar to the D7000 actually, which I'm actually filming this video with right now. Otherwise I would show it to you as well. Very similar to the D7000. Basically what's happening though is Nikon, there's a great shift going on in Nikon's lineup right now. A lot of models are closer to the higher end models in a lot of respects. So you see a lot of the higher end features coming down from some of the higher models and going to models just below. And that's kind of what's happening on this camera to a great extent. On the new D5200 that we took a look at recently, you'll notice that it inherited the 39-point autofocus system from the D7000. This camera is now a 51-point autofocus system, so it gets a focus system that, as far as I can tell right now, seems to be pretty close to the same focus system that you have on the higher end Nikons like the D800 and D4. I would imagine that it's tweaked a little bit different, so it's probably not as responsive as it is on the higher cameras, but it does seem to be the same focus system. So you have that feature. And of course, like all the other Nikons at this point, it seems like 24 megapixels is like Nikon's new number. This one's 24 megapixels. It is a different sensor though than the one in the D5200. The 5200 sensor is made by Toshiba. The D3200 sensor is not a Toshiba one apparently. It appears to be a Sony unit. This one seems to be a different sensor altogether still. It doesn't have an anti-aliasing filter, which we're going to be talking about that a little bit later once we look at this camera in some specific shooting situations. So very unique features. I expect the high ISO to be very good on this also. Now that we've kind of gotten through all the new camera launches, at least in Nikon, we're going to begin starting some comparisons for our next videos. So we'll be looking at, like, this camera and the 5200 and 3200 all in the same video. So anyway, stay tuned for that. Some of the other things that I've noticed on the newer cameras is Nikon focus adjustment. All the newer Nikons now all have the same type of setup where you have one button that essentially allows you to change your focus area modes and your focus drive modes. So that's something else I've noticed. The first thing I noticed when I took this out of the box was Nikon got rid of the LCD screen protector thingy, which I'm kind of sad to see that go. But let's see what else we have here specs wise on this camera. I kind of thought that it would be a little bit faster than the 7000. I thought it'd be, in the 7 to 8 frames a second range. It is still 6 like the D7000, which I don't consider to be slow, but I do wish that were a little bit faster. However, when you consider that they've gone from 16 megapixels up to 24 now, there is a little bit of, there's a little bit of extra processing going into that, so I can see that. And it does make up for a lot of that with having the newer 51-point focus system. I definitely like that they decided to put that feature there. This has also got Nikon's newer body design. So, newer mid-range body design. So it's got the same type of build quality as the D7000 and D600. It still has a weather sealing like the higher end pro bodies like the D800 and D4, but it's not a fully metal body, so it's kind of their new in-between sort of thing. So basically it's partially metal, partially plastic. Not really a bad thing there. In the past, I've personally had the the D7000, the D90, and even the D80. And those cameras were all plastic. Well, minus the D7000, the 90 and the 80 were all plastic on the outside, and I never had any durability issues with those. So having a hybrid metal plastic body, I don't think that will be any durability issue at all. I'm definitely not the type to knock my camera gear around a bit. So anyways, other things that I noticed on this is it is a 1/8000th of a second shutter speed now. So basically, that's something that typically you have in the higher body or higher range Nikons. Typically on the mid-range model, you usually limit it to 1/4000th of a second. So it is interesting to note that this is 1/8000th of a second, like the higher end bodies. Of course, still compact still SD and not compact flash. This camera is a very interesting. It's in a very interesting position. It seems almost like true pro level crop sensor cameras are dead at this point, and I know a lot of you don't want to hear that, and I'm actually not that thrilled about it either. Back when we had the D300, it was basically the same camera body, same focus system, same build as the D700. These days, it kind of seems like Nikon and even Canon, although we'll get to that at a later date, it seems like they're starting to kind of market DX for more, higher end consumer users and entry level users. It doesn't seem like there's really a true pro level APS-C censored camera. This seems to be the closest thing to that though. So, but anyways, if you're looking for a pro level body, my recommendation is still to start looking towards full frame. Although this is not a bad camera, as you are just about to find out as we go ahead and take a closer look. Okay, taking a closer look at the camera, I actually noticed a few other things about it that I didn't point out to you guys in the first part of this. As I looked more, there's a lot of things about this camera that weren't apparently obvious. But that's why you're watching this video. We'll go ahead and start with the rear of the camera. The main thing I noticed here, of course, is, as I mentioned in the first half, there's no LCD screen protector. However, it is a larger screen. It's 3.2 inches, so it's pretty much the same size as the, it's the same size as the screen on the D800 and D4. However, it's a higher resolution screen than the one on the D800 and D4, and also on the previous D7000. So instead of it being 920,000 dots, it's actually 1.2 million. And that's something that really stood out to me as soon as I powered on the screen. I mean, it's much sharper, the menus are easier to use, and everything just looks all around better. One other thing that I noticed on this camera is that Nikon, of course, they continue their tradition of having all the controls kind of the same across all their models now, which is very nice when you own multiple cameras and you switch back and forth between them. You don't have to think as much about how to control things on all your different cameras. Right here we have our live view control, and it's pretty much like on the higher end bodies now. So you've got your still mode up here, and then you have your video mode down at the bottom. And then you just hit the middle part of this to actually activate your live view. So as you can see, we're in still live view mode right now, and all of our functions work like they did on pretty much every other camera in this range, going all the way back to like the D70. You can hit the ISO button, rotate the rear wheel, our quality, whoops, actually that's a zoom in for doing this. And then your white balance is right there. So pretty much same exact control layout there. If you guys haven't seen my pro level versus mid-range versus entry level control video, definitely watch that. I talk a lot more about DSLR controls in general. If we go down to this, we have our video display, and so you can see that it brings up the audio levels there, which is very nice. It's nice that they continue to do a lot more with video controls on cameras these days, which is awesome. Going back to that still live view mode for a moment, if we hit our info button, we can go between some different options here. So we can bring up a grid, and we can bring up our whole virtual horizon view as well, which is nice. The one thing I noticed that I thought was a little bit odd on this camera is on all the other Nikons, the higher ones, like the 600 and 800, this actually shows you a little bit more information. It actually will show you when you're level in a roll like this, so you can see it turns green. But on the higher cameras, it also shows you pitch, so you can move the camera up and down, and it'll show you that direction as well. Thought it was kind of odd that this one doesn't show that. But anyways, whatever. One other thing, Nikon has their now famous info button, so that works as usual. However, on the D7000, you would hit this button a second time, and then the little cursor would jump down here, and you could change all this info. So you could go down and change your function of your custom buttons. You could change your picture controls, and you know, all that sort of thing. This camera doesn't have that though. This camera actually adds this button that has an eye on it, which Nikon, they call that something now, I forget. But you hit this button, and that's actually what jumps you over here to where you can make all those adjustments. So they basically gave you an extra button, so it's a little bit easier. There's not as much button pressing, and it's not quite as fiddly as it was on the 7000. I will point out that this camera has HDR now too in camera, which is something that 7000 didn't have. Traditionally, I haven't been the world's greatest fan of HDR photography, so I'm going to have to play with that a little bit. People often ask me about it, and I'm just not the world's biggest fan of HDR, but I promise guys, I'll give it a go on this camera. You can also change your image area mode here. So we can go off DX, and we can actually go to a 1.3 crop. And the thing that's interesting about that is, if you're shooting sports, it'll get you a little bit closer, so you can get a little bit more range out of your lens. And you end up with a 15 megapixel picture, as opposed to a 24 if you're on that mode. That also makes the camera shoot a little bit faster. So instead of it doing, which of course we've got our drive modes up here, like always. And of course it has a lock on it, which is something that 7000 didn't have. So you can't just turn this now, you have to hit the button down and rotate it. So it kind of prevents you from accidentally bumping this. So that's pretty much something that was added on the D600. But if we are in that 1.3 crop mode and continuous high, notice that I can now do 7 frames a second. If I go back to our DX area, as you can see, I'm not adapted to having another button to do this. If we go back to our DX area, we are now back to 6 frames a second. So if you're needing a little bit more speed, and you need a little bit more reach, you can put it in that 1.3 crop. It'll give you 7 frames a second. You'll have better AF coverage there as well, because you know you're cropping in, and you'll also gain a little bit of speed as well. Okay, now we'll go ahead and take a look at some of the other options on the camera. Okay, so a lot of things on this camera we can actually kind of skip over a bit, because a lot of it is going to be very similar to all the other cameras in this range. It does have 2 SD card slots, just like the D600 and D7000, so nothing really special to go over there. It also uses the same ENEO15 battery as the D7000 and D600, and you know, D800, so nothing special there. You'll get about 950 pictures per battery charge, which is about 50 less than what you get on the D7000, probably just because this camera is having to push around a lot more data. But otherwise, I'd say that's pretty much negligible. Over on this side, this is where all of our controls are, sorry, our ports are, rather. I like how Nikon has given it the same style of doors that the D4 has. So, for example, like right here at the top, you have your microphone and USB. You can these are kind of bisected in the middle there, so you can open that without having to open the entire thing. So that's kind of neat. This is a proprietary USB connection, as you notice. It's the same type that's used on the D5200 and some of the other Nikons, so it's not a standard USB. Something to take note of, I guess. And you've got HDMI here, which it also has a uncompressed HDMI, just like the D800, so if you're wanting to send HD video to an external recorder, you have the ability to do that. One other thing that's nice for video is your headphone jack here. So it is possible to monitor your audio levels. And then you have the same remote terminal that all the other Nikons in this range have used. So it will take the DC, MC, DC2 wired remote rather, and that will also take the GP1 GPS unit also. And unfortunately, it looks like Nikon will never build GPS into a DSLR, but you guys know what I'm always talking about when it comes to GPS in body. Of course, autofocus and manual focus here. Same setup as on all the other Nikons, from D7000 all the way up to D4. If you want to change your focus drive mode, what you do is you hit the button, you rotate the rear dial, and you go between auto drive mode selection, single, or continuous. If you press and hold the button and rotate the front dial up here, you go between your area modes. So you can go between like a auto area mode, single point, 9 points, 21 points, and all the way out to the maximum 51, and then 51 with 3D tracking. So very, very intuitive setup there. Very easy to use across Nikon's range right now, so I like that quite a bit. You also will notice that you have the record button up here also. So once again, this is something that we see on a lot of other Nikon models. Definitely it's nice to see Nikon finally stepping up their game in terms of video. And then this also has a stereo microphone, just like the D5200 has. So that's good also. The only thing I was a little bit saddened by in video mode on this camera is that it's not like the D800 in the fact that you can't be in live view and change f-stop. So it is more like the D7000 and D5200 and D3200 in that area. You still have your f-stop adjustment, but you have to turn your live view off first, adjust your f-stop, and then turn your live view back on again. So I was a bit saddened by that. But all in all, still a very, very comprehensive package for video. The other thing that I like about the video on this camera is something that only the D5200 has at this point, and that is the ability to do 1080p at 60 frames per second. So if we go down to our movie settings here, and we choose that, you can see that I have different frame rate options. Okay, as you guys just saw there, the option for 60 frames a second and 50 frames a second was actually grayed out a second ago, and I had to pause for a second and say, well, why exactly did it do that? As it turns out, you actually can't do 60 frames a second if you're in the full area mode. So you have to be in the 1.3 crop mode. So earlier I had the camera in DX and movie settings, and as you can see, I can't go to the 60 frame a second option. So in order to get that 60 frame a second in 1080i, I said P earlier, but it's actually I, you have to be over in the 1.3 crop mode. And this is something that I'm just going to have to go out and play with a little bit more. And of course I'll give you guys an update once I do more with this. By the way, if you are in a region where, PAL is the video standard instead of NTSC, then you'll notice that you will have, you won't have the 60 frame a second option. It'll basically be 50. So just difference in video standards there. But that's how all that works out. And of course, as I go out and shoot with this some more, I'll have lots more for you guys to take a look at. I'll do a lot more comparison between the two cameras, or between this camera and the 7000, and we'll probably even look at the 5200 and 3200 as well. Especially once these cameras get more common. So we'll take a look at that some, and I'm definitely eager to see how this camera does in sports situations and things like that. I'm kind of due to get a new camera or two myself right now. So especially with my sight set on the D800, I won't have anything that'll be terribly fast anymore. So this could be my speed camera. But we'll just have to see how that goes. Until next time, definitely be sure to subscribe for all future updates. Like the video if you like it. Give me feedback, good, bad, negative, positive, neutral. Write me in the comments below, and I try my hardest to get back to everyone. Until next time, this is Jeremy Smith, Photog Jay the Great, signing off.